Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of chatter about this USC program heading into the Big Ten in 2024. And quite frankly, a lot of media talking heads in the college football landscape, not really believing in this USC team heading into 2024 in the Big Ten. And I think this comes down to a lot of people just focusing on the question marks and not focusing on the reasons to believe in this USC program heading into 2024. Yes, I've been very vocal that I do have some question marks about this USC team in the Big Ten in 2024, but I've also been very vocal that there are a lot of reasons to believe in this USC team as well heading into 2024. Want to dive into some of those reasons that I think USC can surprise a lot of people in the Big Ten during this 2024 year. We'll touch on some of the question marks we have as well. Really excited to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the USC fans. Y'all know I love talking this program. The amount of support you guys have shown the boys, all the fight-ons in the comment section, that stuff means the world to the boys. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some feedback from you guys as well. I learn a ton from you guys every time I talk some USC football. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with the positives, right? I want to start with the reasons to believe in this USC program, because I think we're at that point during the offseason where people just want to nitpick and focus on the question marks. You start looking at the reasons to believe in this USC team. I think it starts with the quarterback play. You look at the Big Ten landscape and say, how many quarterbacks are you taking over Miller Moss heading into the 2024 year? There's not many. You look at a team like Michigan, massive question marks about who's going to even be the starting quarterback heading into 2024. You look at Penn State, massive question marks about Drew Allard. You look at Ohio State and say, it sounds like Lincoln Riley went with Miller Moss over pursuing Will Howard in the transfer portal after that bowl game against Louisville. And I'll be the first one to say, not trust Lincoln Riley in terms of the evaluation of the quarterback position more than just about any head coach that you see in the country. And so you start at looking at the most important position in the sport of college football and say, USC might have one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten heading into 2024. I think the only quarterback that you might make the argument that you take over him is potentially Dylan Gabriel with the Oregon Ducks, another team that you guys know I'm very high on heading into 2024. Not a lot of people are talking about Miller Moss and how good he can be during the 2024 season. I think largely because a lot of the emphasis is on you're losing Caleb Williams. I don't think there's a lot of college football fans who are very familiar with Miller Moss. We broke down the film from Miller Moss in that Louisville game, was extremely impressive. And I think a lot of USC fans are sitting there and saying, I feel really good about where USC is in the quarterback department heading into 2024. I think the second thing you want to look at and the second reason to really believe in this USC team is the explosive plays. We talk about this all the time. The most important metric to offenses in college football is the explosive play rate. You look at USC's numbers. They were top 5 in the country in yards per play at 7.1. That was more than Ohio State. That was more than Michigan in the 2023 year. You start looking at this USC team. You start looking at the teams at their schedule. We're going to take a look at their schedule in just a little bit and say, yeah, we might have some question marks on the inside of the defensive line. Can USC stop the run? We're going to get to that in just a little bit. How many teams in the Big Ten can go blow for blow with USC on the offensive side of the football if these games start getting into a track meet where teams are scoring on USC scoring? How many Big Ten teams with quarterbacks do you trust to outscore USC in some of those track meet kind of games? I think the answer is there's not many teams that you really believe can just purely outscore USC in 2024 in the Big Ten. You look at the talent that's going to be around Miller Moss, the amount of young talent in that wide receiver room, the amount of wide receivers that can really create those game-changing plays. Guys like Zachariah Branch, guys like Deuce Robinson, a guy like Jacoby Lane, who I've just been banging the table for pretty much the whole offseason. I look at this USC team and say, you got plus quarterback play with Miller Moss. You got a ton of talent around him. You have Lincoln Riley calling the plays. And then I look at their schedule and say, how many Big Ten teams do I trust to just outscore USC during the 2024 season? I think the short answer is Not that many teams. And then you start looking on the defensive side of the football. And one thing that I think USC fans should really be fired up about is the secondary. You look at this USC secondary in 2023, blown coverages, blown assignments, not playing the football in the air. It was largely a disaster, not only from a personnel standpoint, but also from a coaching standpoint. I mean, we all know the failures of Alex Grinch. Couple of reasons to be fired up about this USC secondary is one, I think there's a good chance that they completely brought in 5 new starters on the defensive side of the football. And that's not necessarily me knocking guys like Jalen Smith or a guy like Prophet Brown, guys that I've been vocal, I really do believe in heading into 2024. But more importantly, you look at, Greedy Vance at that nickel cornerback role. You look at John Humphrey, the Carlos Nicholson at cornerback, Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey at the safety spot, and say, not only do you have a massive upgrade bringing in a guy like Dan Lynn and Doug Belk from a coaching standpoint, you also have some massive upgrades from a personnel standpoint as well. And when you get better from personnel and coaching standpoint, those are some of the reasons that you can really believe in this USC secondary making a massive jump heading into 2024. That's another reason to really believe in this USC defense. I think this secondary is going to be one of the more improved units across the country in that 2024 year. And how does that kind of get into the biggest question we have about this USC team? And that is, can they stop the run in 2024? If you poll a lot of USC fans, we just talked about the things they are excited about. That one big question mark is you kind of missed on some big bodies on the defensive line. Are teams like Iowa, are teams like Penn State or Nebraska, are they going to be able to just run the football on this USC defense, keep that offense off the field, and kind of control how the game is going to be played? That's the biggest question mark. That is the recipe for a lot of teams to attack this USC team. Why should USC fans maybe be a little bit more optimistic than a lot of people across the country with regards to stopping the run? I think it starts with Dan Lynn. You look at Dan Lynn at UCLA. This is a massive stat for USC fans. USC fans should kind of have this written down on their sticky notes. 2.7 yards per carry last year for that UCLA defense allowed. That was number 2 in the country. That UCLA defense under Dan Lynn was one of the best run defenses that you saw in the country during that 2023 season. Now Dan Lynn's coming to USC and saying, all right, we do have some question marks on the inside of that defensive line. But going back to the secondary, since we have a lot of belief that this secondary can be pretty damn good, are there different ways that USC can try to stop the run against some of these Big Ten teams? And let's face it, you guys know I'm a Big Ten guy. There are not a lot of offenses that from a passing attack, from a quarterback, wide receiver standpoint, really put a lot of fear into. There are a lot of one-dimensional teams in the Big Ten that can't push the ball down the field but can run the football. And if you believe that there are not a lot of teams that can push the football down the field, can you walk in Kamari Ramsey? Can you walk in Achille Arnold into the box and kind of use those guys as some more run defenders to maybe answer some of those question marks that you have on the inside of the defensive line? You go back to UCLA last year, Kamari Ramsey had more run stops than both Gary Smith and Jay Toya last year. You talk about guys that can be factors in the run game and stopping the run. Achille Arnold, Kamari Ramsey, those are 2 safeties that you can put in the box and kind of have an extra hat in the game trying to stop rushing attacks in the Big Ten. And you combine that with not a lot of Big Ten teams being able to push the ball down the field, allowing a USC secondary to maybe squeeze down into the line of scrimmage, put some safeties in the box to stop the run. There are different ways that you can stop the run besides just having dominant guys on the inside of the defensive line. And then you look at the inside of the defensive line. We know what Bear Alexander is, but then you start looking at Elijah Hughes going into his second year. You look at guys like Jide Abisari or Carlin Jones coming in as true freshmen. Maybe you are a little better than what you thought on the inside of the defensive line. Now, don't get it twisted. Those are the question marks I have is on the inside of the defensive line from a talent and depth standpoint. That being said, there are different ways that I think Dan Lynn could potentially stop some rushing attacks in the Big Ten that not enough people are talking about. And then you look at the USC schedule and say, one, you're going to get a really fun game early against LSU. And I think you're going to get a really good feel for how good and dangerous can this USC team be against LSU, which is, kind of a side note, one of the more intriguing games that you'll see all year. two of the best offenses in the country with two of the defenses that were really bad in 2023. Got new defensive coordinators, a lot of new additions in the portal. That is going to be an extremely fun game from a storyline standpoint. But a couple other things that I like is you get a bye week after Utah State, then you go on the road to Michigan. One, coming off a bye, that's massive. But more importantly, if there was a time that you wanted to play Michigan, you wanted to play them in September, because you look at Michigan replacing all that talent to the NFL. There are going to be a lot of new faces that are just going to be getting their feet wet at the college football level. And if you ask me where, as a Michigan fan that you guys know I am, where am I most concerned? I'm probably concerned about Michigan in the month of September much more than I'm concerned about them in the month of November. I think they'll be playing their best football in the month of November. If there's a time for USC to maybe sneak a game, it's probably early on the road against Michigan. Then you scroll down and kind of get into that point of, all right, Wisconsin. A lot of question marks about Luke Fickell going into year two. You go on the road at Minnesota. You got Penn State, Maryland, Rutgers, Washington. How many teams do you think can just outscore USC in that list? When you talk about USC having the better quarterback play and wide receiver play than just about every single one of these teams that we see on this schedule. You get a bye week and then you go and you play Nebraska, you get them at home, you get UCLA, and then you get Notre Dame at home to finish it out. I look at this USC team and say, yeah, we certainly have some question marks about this program. Like we have question marks about a lot of different programs, but I don't think enough people are talking about the reasons to believe in this USC team as well. It's going to be one of the more intriguing programs that we see in 2024, year one in the Big Ten. Y'all know I'm fired up for them. We'll talk about this team in a lot of different ways over the next couple months. Appreciate y'all rocking with the boys. We'll cut it there. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.